Hey, welcome to a new tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll be covering the event system, which is a new system that allow actors to subscribe to events happening in the game. And this means that an actor can be listening in for something, and then you can call that event from somewhere else, and the event will be triggered on that actor, which will allow you to run whatever code that you want. This is very useful for creating complex, highly interactive gameplay rules, where you want to make it so that any sort of thing happening in the game can affect anything else. You can have special abilities that units have that are listening for events that happen that cause some sort of effect to trigger, etc. So it's very useful for that sort of stuff. It's also useful to create more decoupled code where you don't have these hard references to all sorts of other kinds of actors, where you create this tangled spaghetti web of references to all sorts of different actors. So keeping stuff decoupled, it's very useful for that as well. Now I'm using this extensively with the stat system. So I added the stat system kind of using many of the features of the event system. So that is why, at least in the version I'm currently using, you'll find this in the stats system folder under experimental, and in core you'll find the relevant blueprints for using the event system here. But this will of course change in the future when I move this out of experimental. But this is a battle tested system because I developed the event system originally for the roguelike deck builder toolkit, which is another of my assets. And one of the reasons I developed that asset was precisely to develop this kind of complex interactive event system, since I knew I wanted to create something like that for the advanced turn-based tile toolkit as well, but in a game genre that is a bit less complicated. So that is a system that I know works really well, and now I'm excited to introduce much of the power you'll get from the event system into this toolkit as well. And that is what you can see the beginning of in the stat system, and at the moment also the strategy RPG maps, where you can see some of this in action. Now to best explain this, it's better to use a practical example. So here you can follow along. I will, if you want, I will add some new blueprints just for illustrating and demonstrating how to set up something with the action system. Something you will note that has already been set up here is that for the action system to work, you will need to have the global dispatcher hub blueprint placed in your scene, and you will find that, well, it is here at the moment. If I've moved it at a point when you are viewing this tutorial, you can always just go to the top folder and search for and search for global, and you can find it and where it is. But that is where it is at the moment. So that has been added to our scene already. Now for this, I'll add just a simple blueprint and set this up to work with the event system. So I'll just do that in the top folder, just for this example here. Or well, maybe I'll do it in the stat system core here. Actually, that's probably not where you want to place it, but then I can show the various blueprints that we are using. And I don't have to jump between folders just for the tutorial's sake. Yeah, we'll make a new blueprint. I'll just make a simple actor for this, and I'll call this BP event test. And I'll place it in the level. Let's open it up, and we'll make something that is visual. I just want to have something here that changes visually when events happen, so that we can easily see the event system working. So let's add a static mesh here, and I'll make it a sphere. Let's see, I'll show the engine content so I can find the regular sphere mesh here, which is the bigger one. That's the 100 by 100 one. That's good. I'll just let it float a bit. I mean, I can just place it wherever I want, but this is fine. Okay, so we have our sphere hovering over here. We want to change something on this actor when an event happens. So to make an actor be able to listen for events, you will have to add an interface to this actor. So let's go to the class settings here, and we will add the event holder blueprint interface. So this will give us an event, an interface event, which is the one that will be called when the event we are bound to is called. So we can add this event. I'll keep the begin play, we'll use that later, but we'll search for the run event, which we have here, which is what will be called. So now this actor can run events that are called, but we need to also bind to an event. We need to tell this actor that you are listening for this specific event, and if this or any number of events we want to subscribe to happens, then we will run this event here. So we can do this on begin play, and we can find bind, let's see, yeah, bind event to global dispatcher hub. We can use this one. And then we want to specify which actor will this event be called on when this event tag is being called somewhere else. So in this case, and in most cases, we want to call this actor itself. So for the time being, let's use one of the existing events that I have added to the toolkit. So we can search here for an event. Oops, and we'll find the various events that I have added. So we can have something that happens, let's say, when a unit is selected. So whenever a unit is selected, we want to call an event. So I can do this. Yeah, let's do something that's visually obvious. I'll print a string here. I'll just print the name of the event. And I'll also update this actor visually in some way, so I'll just set the actor scale. I'll just increase it by something. I'll get the actor scale. And I'll multiply this by, let's say, 1.5 each time a unit is selected. Now let's see if this works. So here we have the sphere, and we end our turn, and you see whenever we select a new unit, this sphere increases in size by 50%. So this is working, and we can also see the event being printed here. Okay, great. But this event, we want to know maybe where this is called. And if you're trying to add this stuff to a new level and you're not using any of the other like sort of stats system things here, then you will not actually see this happening, because this event, the unit select, that's only being called when you're using some of these new types of actors. So you have to so unit select isn't something that's just called on its own. You have to specify that this should be called when a unit is selected. And we might want to find out, okay, where is this? I might be able to remember this, but one thing that's very useful to know in Unreal Engine, so for anyone who doesn't, you can search for anything in all blueprints in your project by clicking Control-Shift-F. I thought Control-Shift-F, yeah, here it is. And you can search for anything and you'll find which blueprints it is. This is find in blueprints. You'll also find this in window and find in blueprints. Useful for all sorts of things, knowing where a function is called, where a variable is used, etc. So we can just search here for this event unit select, and we'll see where it is used. So we can now see that in our event test blueprints, we are using it, right? This is where we just played it. We can see that's the only place it's actually being bound to, and the only other place we'll find it at the moment is in BP unit stats, which is the unit that is used for these guys here. So we can go to this and we can see exactly where this is called. So we will see now that when this unit is selected, when you have this queue show unit select event called, then we will call this event in the global dispatcher hub, and I'll get into what that means. But this was showing how, if you are wondering where something is being called or where an event is being used, that is a good way to find it. Anyways, to describe how this works and also the other stuff here, the variables here a bit more, let's do things a bit more from scratch. Now that now that I've shown you some of the very basics of how to set it up, let's do something a bit more involved. So we might want to make a new event, right? So there aren't that many events that are included by default. Likely, if you're watching this in the future, I will have added more events, but you will also very likely want to add your own events for whatever events are important in your game. So to add new events, they are a type of gameplay tag. So if you don't know how gameplay tags work, then I will link to the documentation on that by Epic in the description. So you'll find the gameplay tags in data and event tags. So there are the gameplay tags that are being used. You can add your own data tables, by the way. You don't need to use this. You can create new miscellaneous and a data table, and you can find the gameplay tag table row to create your own gameplay tag tables. And then you need to add those to the config of your project. But for this, let's just use the existing event tags here, and we'll just add another event. So let's add a new one. So I'll just add an event we can use for testing here. So I'll just call this new event test. And then we have to specify where we find it when we are looking for it in this branching gameplay tag structure. So you can see that it is structured, event, and then you'll find sometimes you have, subsections, etc. So we can add this. I already have this debug tag under the event tag. We can use this again. So let's say event debug test, and now we have a new event that we can use. And then where do we want to call this event? So we can do this very simply. So for this, I'm going to add another kind of test object. I'll just make another actor, and I'll call this BP event caller test. I'll just add this to our scene, and I'll just enable input for this. Auto receive input, and when we press the X key, it's just for testing, right? Then I want to call an event in the global dispatcher hub. So call event in global dispatcher hub. We also have this payload option. I'll get into what that is later. So we want to call our event, which is then this test event, and we have to specify a calling object for this. This is something you can use, or you don't have to, but you have the ability to specify who is calling this event, which is something you might want to use in this in an actor that is subscribing to it. So now we are calling this event the test event, but it's not doing anything at the moment because nothing is subscribing to this event, right? So we can go back to our event test blueprint, and we can subscribe to multiple events. So let's keep being bound to the unit select event here, but we'll bind to multiple events. So yeah, I haven't added the bind to multiple events to this to the function library yet. This will be added later, so you should be able to find a bind multiple events in a later update. For now, we can do the same thing by accessing the global dispatcher hub more directly. So we can get the global dispatcher hub and then bind multiple events. You should have in the future a similar event to this, so you don't need to access it, but it's doing essentially the same thing. So we'll just delete this, and then we can bind to several events with just one node. So we'll keep the unit select, and we will add our debug test as well. So now we are bound to 2 events. So we will add our unit select event, and we will add our debug, the test debug event here, and we'll have both of those. Now, how do we specify which of these that we're running code on? Because at the moment, whenever a unit is selected or whenever our debug event triggers, then this will resize, and we can see this. We start, so when I end the turn, it will resize. When I press X, it will also resize. So we might want to do, and I likely want to do, different sorts of results depending on which events are going on here. So to do this, we can switch on the event tag, and actually I would recommend, even if you just have one event that you're subscribed to add this sort of switch here, just to make it clear in the code, so you don't need to look at where you're bound to figure out which event that you are calling. But if you only have one event, then you know functionally it will be the same if you don't use a switch, but I would recommend doing it anyway. Just remove the default pin for this, and I'll add a couple of options. So if we have a unit select, I'll do one thing, and if you have then the debug test, then we'll do another. Oh yeah, I did this on the same. Okay, you'll see that there are 2 different kinds here. The one that is specified under action, as this is more of something I'm looking into, specifying when a sort of event is called within an action or not. But this is not currently used, so we'll use this one, which is not under action. So we have these different ones. Let's for the test, let's do what we did last, but let's do something new for the unit select event. Because if we look back on our stats unit here, so we can see that we're inputting this unit here as the calling object. So we can go to this event and we can do something to the calling object if we want to. So instead of doing something then to the to this actor itself, I'll still want to print. Maybe I'll keep this print string in front of this so we can just see the event happening. So we can read that, and then for testing we're setting a new scale. For selecting a unit, let's do something to the unit instead, right? So you can get the calling object here, which we know is a unit, and we'll cast this to let's see, PP unit, and then let's resize the puppet of this unit, right? So we can get the puppet and we can set the scale. We can do the similar thing that we did here. We can then just get the actor scale and then resize the puppet. So this this actor now, it listens for the debug event when the debug event is triggered, which we are currently triggering from our event caller. Then it is getting resizing itself. When a unit is selected, it will resize the puppet of that unit. Now, of course, if you're used to working with this toolkit, you'll know that this is not like the recommended way to do things. You don't want to do anything that's visual within, you know, the regular game logic code. You'd want to spawn an action here and to use that to do the resizing visual stuff, right? But for simplicity's sake of showing the event system, I will not be using actions for these things. But let's see if it works now. So yeah, when we select a unit, the puppet is getting resized. Oh yeah, and it only happens once. Why should that be? Oh yeah, I guess I screwed up the reference a bit, but doesn't matter too much. We can resize this. Let's look. Yeah, I'm getting the scale of the unit. Let's quickly do it instead of the puppet. So now when we're switching units, they are resizing every time, and when we're pressing X, we're resizing this actor here. And you know, since we are in a tutorial, let's do it the proper way, just to make it very clear what I mean here. But we should be using an action, right? Because this stuff is happening instantly when this event is being called. And the unit select event is being called like immediately when a unit is selected in the gameplay code, which will often happen earlier than when it is displayed during gameplay. See my tutorials on the action system if that stuff is unclear. But so we want to instead spot an action here. Now I don't have an action for resizing a puppet, and I won't spend time making one here. But we'll use, let's use some other action that's obviously visible. So we can use animate puppet, say, and then we can see. Get this puppet. We need the puppet as input, and we will play one of our animations. So we can play the hurt animation instead. And now, whenever a unit is selected, this actor here, the event test actor, will cause them to show the hurt animation. So let's see, yeah. So we'll see that is happening. And now we're doing this through an action, which is the appropriate way to do anything that is visual. Right, so I've covered quite a bit by this point, but there's a couple more things that I want to go through before ending the video. So I said I'd go back to explaining the payload. That's fairly simple. So with payload, it's the same thing as calling an event. It's just that you can also pass some reference to an object or actor through this event. So this is useful, if you need any more information to come along with your action. Let's see, this is the test action. So we have a calling object, and we can also specify some payload. And I think the principle is simple enough to understand that I don't need to show it exactly, but it's, say if you are like in an attack ability, and within that attack you want to call an event that is notifying your game that something is being attacked, and then you can pass through like maybe the unit that is attacking as the calling object, but you also want to make anything that is subscribing to this event aware of what the target of the attack is. And the payload is somewhere where you can enter any additional sorts of objects that you want, such as another unit which is the target of the attack. You can also, if you need to pass through some very complex information, you can create like your own new objects that hold multiple variables, right, and pass those through as a payload. So the payload enables you to do more advanced stuff, and I do some of that with the stats system, which I'll go over in a later video. So we'll look at ways to use the payload. But so the payload is passed through here, and then when you are running the event, you have access to the payload here. So the same way we are accessing the calling object, right, we can also access this payload. Right, so final thing to explain then is this global output here. So as you've seen until now, we have called stuff in and bound stuff to the global dispatcher hub, right? That's what we've been using, and that's useful for any sorts of events that you might want any actor to listen in for. But if you have some events that are happening a lot, and you have a lot of actors that are bound to it, you will be calling a lot of events all the time. So sometimes both to keep things clean and also potentially performant, if you're doing something at any unit or like tons of actors in your game are potentially subscribing to, then it's useful to be able to have these individual dispatcher hubs as well. So these are added to unit stats by default. You'll see here that they have this dispatcher hub component, so you can add this component to any actor. And what this is that they have like their own dispatcher hub, and you can have actors call events in that dispatcher hub or being bound to that specific dispatcher hub, and the actors that are bound to events in this specified dispatcher hub, they won't care if those events are being called in the global ones. They'll just listen for this specific dispatcher hub. So this is something that's probably worth elaborating on with an example. So if we look at the events that's being called in unit stats here, you'll see unit select. And it is actually not calling in the global dispatcher hub, it's calling this on its own dispatcher hub component. Though you see that it's also calling the global event. So this means that it's calling this event in its own dispatcher hub and then also calling it in the global one. So it calls it twice essentially. So we can have any actor that is want to subscribe to an event can subscribe to this hub or the global hub. And let's do that with our event test. So we can keep this stuff here. I'll just remove the unit select part. It's just clear, and I'll add the debug one back. Test, and then I want to access the unit one of the specific units here. Now, how to access this? I mean, I'm not sure I can do it in a way quickly that would also make sense in the game, but let's say that we want to just bind to when the turn starts for the first unit in initiative, right? So I can get the turn manager and I can get the initiative order, and I can get a copy of this unit here, and then so this is an actor, but I can get the component, so get component of class to find the dispatcher hub component. So this should get us the dispatcher hub component of the first unit in initiative, and then we will bind event to this hub here. You might also notice there that we can also unbind events, just so we're clear on that. Should be pretty self-explanatory what that does. Event holder self will keep this to then turn start. There. Now this could potentially happen the begin play before the turn manager is initialized and sorting units in initiative. So ideally we would want to set this up with dispatchers or something solid to make sure that they're triggering in the right order, but we can do it lazily for this example and just wait for 0.2 seconds just to be sure that we have set up the turn manager. And now what should happen is that for the debug test event should work as the same, but this unit select resizing thing should only happen for the unit that was the first unit in initiative at the start of the game. So let's see if that works. Oh, there's some error here. Did I forget something? Let's see. Unresolved compiler. Oh yeah, I kept the payload one. We can't use the payload one unless we specify some payload. So let's just switch this back to the one without a payload. There. So now we should be able to test this, and when we end the turn and nothing happens. Did I subscribe to the correct event? Yeah, okay, as I suspected, I chose the wrong one. Turn start, that's something that's called in the turn manager. So we will use unit select. Yeah, because that's the one that's called in our unit stats here. So we'll use that instead. Let's hit play. And now we have this hurt animation played. It's only for one of the units. Actually not the first in initiative, since we're using the default turn manager here, which doesn't care about the order in which the actors are sorted in initiative, just the faction order, so that's why it wasn't the first Gain initiative that got hurt, but we are just subscribing then to the events of this one particular actor. If you are in a situation where you want to subscribe to the same event in both the global dispatcher hub and in a specified dispatcher hub in the same actor, then you have this option here where you can check, okay, the event that's being called at the moment, is this a global one, or is it one that's tied to a local dispatcher hub? So that's the last option to explain in this event here. Now, one last thing to cover is the Debug UI for the event system. So I'll show you that. If you hit play, you can see that we have this debug menu here, which is very useful for figuring out what actors are subscribing to what events. So you can see here in the global dispatcher hub, and then we open this again, you can see these are the events that are being subscribed to in the global dispatcher hub. So we can see here our debug test event, and we can see here that our BP event test, our event test blueprint, is subscribing to this debug test event, right? And we can see then in this one of our units here we have actors in the scene that are of the unit stats anim class, which are both of these. You can see here they only show up if they are subscribing to at least one event, and you can see it. Both of them are subscribing to post modify stat. This is something that's used in the stat system, which I'll get into. And this is the one that we added, unit select. So the event test is subscribing to the unit select event of one of our units. So with this debug menu, you can get an overview of what events are being subscribed to by what actors, which is very useful for getting an overview, or if you have some sort of bug, some event that you feel should be happening which isn't, or something that is happening which shouldn't be, then you can confirm or check which actors are actually subscribing to what particular events. So I think that should cover all of the most important stuff about the event system. Now, as always, if you have any questions, something that confuses you, just let me know in my support thread or on the Discord, and I'll do my best to help there. I'll also be using the event system in future tutorials, so you should expect to see more practical examples also, which should hopefully make it even easier to work with. But I've found this system extremely useful. Like I mentioned, this is something I felt was necessary for building the sort of complex game systems that I want to have in my own games. So hopefully this system will also make it easier for you guys to add new exciting mechanics to your own games. So with that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.